We're getting close to the end of Bullseye, but before we go, allow me to give you a culture tip. It's the Outshot. Simon Rodia had a full life before he moved to Watts. He'd come from Italy as a 15-year-old to join his older brother in Pennsylvania. They worked side by side in the coal mines, at least until the older Rodia was killed in an accident. Simon ended up pulling up stakes and moving across the country to Seattle. He met a girl and married, then moved with her to Oakland and had 2 children. Then he divorced and headed south to the outskirts of L.A. Rodia then was 4'10", 42 years old, barely literate, alone, and working odd jobs. But he wanted to make something big. In 1921, he bought himself a cottage on the railroad tracks. The geometry of the lot was strange. The train right-of-way cut it into a long triangle with a little house at its base. Rodia settled in, and he decided to dedicate his life to building something.
I built a tower myself, and I got it ahead in my mind. I know I want to do something. I say, I'm going to do something. I'm going to do something. I'm going to do something.
Rodia's materials surrounded him. He found scrap rebar and braced it under the railroad tracks to bend it. He mixed sand with concrete that he took home from the construction sites he worked on. He grabbed kitchen tile from a job at a tile works, and he found glass bottle shards on the sidewalk. He walked along the railroad tracks, from Watts all the way to the ocean, to gather shells, then back to use them. It was an 1.5-hour walk on his way out, and 2.5 hours back, weighted down with shells. Most days he'd put in regular hours as a laborer, then come home to build. Just him, no help. Day after day after day. Bending rebar, building joints with coat hangers and chicken wire, layering concrete, pushing in shells and bits of colored glass. For 30 years he added, built up, embellished.
Yeah, I did all by myself. I never had a single helper. One thing, I couldn't hire any helper. I don't have no money. Not a thing. If I hire a man, he don't know what to do. A million of times, I don't know what to do myself. I was wake up all night.
As a depression and a world war and the atomic bomb passed by, Rodia worked in his little wedge of backyard. First decorating the little cottage, then starting in on huge, glittering towers. Climbing up them without ropes, just a bucket, some hand tools, and a lineman's strap. He built magnificent, glittering spires, concentric rings, 99.5 feet tall, like a spacecraft built of mud and crystals. Towers aligned along the axis of the triangle, like the masts of a sailing ship, pointing back east, toward the country and the family that he left as a child.
I build a tower the people like. Everybody come.
And then, when he was done, he was done. In 1954, 30-some years after he started, he gave the property to his neighbor and packed his bags for his sister's house, 400 miles away. He never once went back. Decades were spent fighting for the towers. Neighbors who'd known them all their lives, artists and architects awed by their audacity, folks who were proud to have something that magical there in the outskirts of L.A. At one point, city engineers hooked up a pickup truck and a cable to the tallest tower. If it could take 10,000 pounds of lateral force, they said, they'd leave it there. If not, they'd lay the whole thing flat. An anxious crowd gathered outside to protest. The towers made it through the test, through the earthquakes, fires. They stood through everything. When the city was trying to take them down, they called the towers an unauthorized public hazard, built with, and this is a quote, no rational plan. And part of that is true. There was no rational plan. Art is not rational. If it's any good, it's much more than that. The site finally became a park in 1985. At the base of the Watts Towers, Simon Rodia impressed his hand tools into the concrete, and the letters SR. He was an artist who'd built something to last forever. That's my Outshot.